Welcome back to the stream. We're going to continue with the Destiny slash new people whose name that I don't know debate. They're debating about morality. And so we're just going to jump back in from where we were last time. It says we only got 26 minutes in. I thought
progress, but you express some skepticism as to whether or not it's due more to something like advancements in technology and so on. I want to make sure that we don't dismiss the concession on grounds of that, because that plays a role in science as well. We can definitely 100% without any doubt say.
So as if I remember correctly, this is a couple of days now, they were talking about the ways in which we can validate our perspective on truths, transcendent truths. And so obviously there are ways in which we do that with science, and they were trying to figure out, well, what's the way that we could do that with morality? Is there any way that we can at a fundamental level realize a truth to morality? So that's pretty much what they were talking about. Let's continue.
Our ability to do science well today and make advancements in science today is not just because we're so much smarter than the people of the past, but because of advancements in technology, we're able to test things that most of humanity wasn't able to test. So scientific progress really does depend on and benefit from things like the invention of the telescope, the invention of the microscope, the invention of the internet, the personal computer, innovations in transportation. So all of these things are connected, but just because we have other elements to thank for our capacity to make progress doesn't mean that progress isn't made in the way that we do science. I would say in a similar way, we do see progress when it comes to morals. So for instance, we can say that people today think differently about slavery than most people throughout human history. That, and I actually, let me just ask you that, because I don't want to assume, or maybe we don't have to even waste time arguing about that. But do you believe that the world's view on slavery today is pretty much the same as it's been for most human history, and there has been no progress made on that?
I feel like there have been ebbs and flows, but I'm not sure, again, if I would credit all of that to like the moral evolution of people more so than to the economic evolution of different societies. So for instance, I would say in some ways, like slavery that existed in the United States was kind of uniquely, I'll say out there, or evil, I guess. And the idea of like wholesale chattel slavery based on your race from birth to death, and then that would follow you through for your entire family, was kind of a uniquely terrible conception of slavery, which would have been arguably worse than some of the forms of slavery that had been existed and had been practiced prior to that. So that would be like a dip. And then obviously we had our whole Civil War. Obviously the rest of the planet has largely moved on from slavery-ish. Some people would argue that visa, work trap schemes and everything, Dubai and everything, can kind of amount to slavery. But when I look at this, my question is like, if we weren't in the economic state we would be in today, would everybody have the same view of slavery, or would we regress back to that if people thought that it was more economically viable or didn't want to share as many, limited resources with different types of people? Yeah.
I mean, I'd ask the same thing about scientific progress as well. If we didn't have the wealth that we have, the technology that we have, the economic incentives that we have, the social structures that we have, I'm not so sure we'd be able to make this kind of progress. But more importantly, I think you're conflating the distinction between the reality of moral progress and the various explanations for why we have that progress. So for instance, if we point to a guy who used to make no money and now he's a millionaire, one person can say he got there because he works really hard. Another person can say, no, his father just gave him the money. Another person can say, well, he cheated a bunch of people and he's really duplicitous. That's why he had the money. But there's one thing we can disagree on. The guy has made economic progress. Maybe his reasons are legit, maybe his reasons are illegit, but we don't want to confuse the various elements that made progress more accessible, more possible, with the reality of progress itself. And so even when it comes to people's motives for seeking truth, people's motives for engaging in discussion and debate, we do a lot more of that in today's culture in terms of like, we don't settle disagreements as much by violence, right? We settle disagreements by sitting down and discussing things. you can't separate that from the economic incentives we have.
Can I ask a question real quick
yeah.
on that? Because this word keeps coming up, and I think it underlines a lot of our potential disagreement or actual disagreement.
Yeah.
Whenever you say things like progress,
Yeah.
we're assuming like kind of a start and finish, and then like a directional thing. And I feel like progress is easy to talk about in some ways. When we talk about like economic progress, number go up, typically
Yeah.
good, right? Makes more money, typically good.
Yeah.
When we say like moral progress, how are we figuring out where is this delineation? Like, how do we know like, well, this is the start and then this is the end? And how do we test
Sure.
that? What are we looking for? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
I would say being a person of integrity is not just about how you feel. It's about what you actually do, right? And some of those moments that we might deem to be the most heroic moments, the most virtuous moments, are where you don't feel like doing something that is valuable and you choose to do it anyway, right? And so we could say progress, moral progress would be when more people are incentivized to choose the right thing, to choose the more valuable thing, to choose the more healthy thing, even if there are parts of them that really don't feel like it, even if there are parts of them that may not have done that if everything were neutral. So let's say I'm an employer and everyone that works for me is always late. And I make some sort of policy change by saying, how much you get paid depends on this. And then everyone starts to show up on time. We see that the capacity to show up on time was always there. We see an improvement in behavior, that they're behaving more in accordance with the ideal, and a change has been made in the incentives to get people to do that. So when I say moral progress has occurred, I would say that human beings today are more incentivized to do things that we all agree are morally good things to do. And slavery would be an example of that. Not settling debates with violence would be an example of that.
Do you think that falls into kind of like a circularity to where if I have a society full of people who all tell me that trucks do not exist, there is no truck outside. We can go outside and I can show you there is indeed a truck, or there's something here you have to call a truck.
Yeah.
If there's a society and everybody says that murder is good or killing is good,
Yep.
and then I come in and I say, well, actually killing's not good. And then they all disagree with me. What do I point to say, well, look, it really isn't good? Because again, when you gave the employee example, right? Well, that's an easy one because the schedule is good because it's the schedule. So if they come in on time, then I know that it's good with respect to the schedule, much the same that Snape killed Dumbledore with respect to Harry Potter. But external that like contrived measurement system, how do you resolve the disagreement? Yeah.
Well, we both agree that for the most part, humanity agrees on basic underlying moral categories. If we need to hash out differences there, just let me know. But I'm assuming that you agree that in some sense, murder is a society where we just murder people because we disagree with them is a worse society than one in which we handle our disagreements respectfully and respecting one another's rights and so on.
And I think so. We're getting really bedrock here. Okay. But I think these are good. Yeah. So when we say good or bad, there's a question of like, what do we mean when we say good or bad? So I would say that these societies are bad and that they don't survive. But so I think like the difference between that's like a type of normative claim, but it's not a moral claim. I wouldn't say that they're bad and that there's like an objectively bad or evil thing here. I would say they're bad with respect to their ability to persevere or survive into the future. And then a good thing is a thing that satisfies. Like if I want to fill this glass of water, it would be good for the water to be full of water. But it wouldn't be good, like morally good, right? Or if I say, oh, well, I'm parched and I was handed a glass of water that's almost empty, I would say, oh, well, that's bad. But not like morally bad. So when you say...
But it sounds like the black guy is more looking for like a more, how do you say, like transcendental moralism. I don't know if he's religious or not, but it sounds like that's what he's... But that's why his arguments just keep on going in circles, because there's an assumption there. There's like an axiom that he's not acknowledging. And so he's like, it'd be good for people to act in a good way. This is like, what does that mean?
We agree on things that are good or bad. I agree that we agree on those things. But when we say with respect to the society being able to exist or persevere, I don't know if that like satisfies the conditions of goodness or badness. It's the same type of like moral good or bad versus just a normative. Yeah.
Sure. We both agree that a society moving towards the good involves at some level some kind of concept of flourishing. But what appears to differentiate us is that I'm positing something additional. I'm positing that there is an oughtness behind all this or related to this. And you're saying that that's the part that you reject. Okay, so to your question, would this be circular? It would be if the things I'm saying to you now were being presented as an argument for moral realism.
Mhm.
In fairness, I haven't given any reason for why I think moral realism is true. What we're talking about is the consistency that some explanatory accounts have or don't have with moral realism. And so when you say things like, we can measure progress in terms of human flourishing, in terms of less violence, I'm saying that these are things that we actually can measure, and that's consistent with moral realism. Now, I still got to prove moral realism, but these things are not refutations of moral realism. Or for instance, when we give evolutionary accounts of why people have an aversion to things like assault, evolution presupposes an ontology, but it doesn't prove one, right? Evolution starts with basic presuppositions about what sorts of things exist, and it attempts to explain how those things function or how those things emerge. But they don't say anything either way about what kind of substance things have or whether or not things exist. So I'll give an example. Let's say we were to observe a family in two different situations.
I need to know who this guy is. I'm surprised I haven't come across his content before. I'm guessing it's like a jointly owned podcast, and the Minimalists. Yeah. So there's two guys, the blonde guy and this black guy. They seem nice. They seem smart.
Situation one, you have a family that's having a party and they're outside at a pool, and you see the kids, putting their hands in the water. You see the adults dipping their toes in the water. You see people diving in and swimming around. Scenario two, that same family is now around a campfire. They cozy up in the warmth of the fire, but you notice that there's an aversion to touching the fire in a way that wasn't present with them touching the water. And we can ask, well, why is that? Why do they have an aversion to fire that doesn't seem to be present to water? Well, we can have a good evolutionary explanation for that. We can say, well, when they touch the fire consumes them. It creates harm, and they are less likely to survive if they don't have that kind of aversion. So they've evolved to have an aversion to touching fire because you can't survive if you don't have that aversion. Both the realists and the anti-realists on the existence of fire can accept that explanation as being consistent with their ontology. Evolutionary theories can be consistent with multiple competing ontologies. And that explanation doesn't negate the fact that fire is real. And so if some of these explanations are true, it wouldn't negate moral realism. It's not irreconcilable with moral realism. It's consistent. And so everything that I'm saying right now is to sort of defend moral realism against the charge that the facts you're raising is an inconsistency or refutation.
Gotcha.
But in fairness, I have not proven moral realism.
I guess to clarify what I'm saying, I would agree with you. Nothing I'm saying is necessarily going to disprove realism. I guess my argument would just be that everything that I'm saying is necessary and sufficient to make all the statements I would need to about what we call maybe human morality. And I would argue that a realist explanation is just adding an unnecessary layer on top that doesn't need to be there for explaining, I guess, everything that could be explained about it.
Now we have our
sure.
Our I think this is our debate.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay. I guess the question I would have with relation to that, are you familiar with games like The Sims?
Yeah.
So I imagine in The Sims, if you were to make it sufficiently complicated, you could have interactions that resemble like the human world, at some point. I actually have never played, or I played SimCity 2000.
I never played it, but I'm familiar.
Okay, yeah. So very old. But imagining we could create like a sufficiently complex, computer game with The Sims or whatever. If I were to say in The Sims, John murdering Jane would be wrong, is there a type of moral statement or moral fact there, the same way that there could be in our real world of John murdering Jane being wrong? And then I imagine my answer would be, well, no, they're both with respect to some agreed upon system or whatever. But I imagine your answer would be yes. And then my question would be, what's the difference between the moral fact here in these two worlds, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna propose a way of going about that, and you tell me if you're cool with it.
Yeah.
I like to give you my argument for why I think moral realism is true.
Okay, sure.
It's so hard for me to say moral realism when I say moral realism.
Sure.
But I'll give you my argument for that. And then I'm gonna make the case that
Destiny's not one for like
that any argument against moral realism.
Whenever someone tries to make a joke in a debate, he's like, Destiny's not about that.
Effectively undermines physical realism.
Okay.
And every argument that you give for physical realism also substantiates moral realism.
Gotcha.
And after I give my reasons for why it also undermines physical realism.
Okay.
And every argument that you give for physical realism also substantiates moral realism.
Gotcha.
And after I give my reasons for why I believe moral realism is true, I think it'll be easier for me to sort of respond to objections, answer questions, and maybe even be able to apply some pressure back.
Okay.
All right. So
my understanding of moral realism is that there is an absolute transcendent moral nature to the universe. That's my understanding of my layman understanding of moral realism. I've never really read up on the field of study or inquiry or whatever you would say, sort of meta-ethics. I haven't really done that much in-depth research, but just from context, my understanding, that's what it is.
I defined it as a subset of realism, right? In the same way that rocks and mountains exist, I believe that moral fact.
There is a moral, okay, yeah.
Exists. Going back to the appearance versus reality distinction, I think we both agree it's a fair question to ask. Why should you believe that when you seem to see a tree, that it's more than a mere seeming, that this is not just part of the contents of your consciousness, but it's real, it's out there in some sense? I think we justify.
It's something I've been battling with for years now. I've been trying to figure out whether I believe or not, whether I believe or not in moral realism. Because the ideas that I'm attracted to would presuppose that there is some sort of moral foundation to existence, to the universe, that moral facts are real. You certainly should act as if they are. But my more rational, skeptical side says no. So I don't know. I haven't really squared that circle.
It is by an epistemic principle. Inference to best explanation. So we identify certain features of the experience, and we posit realism as the best explanation for those features. So there are lots of features we can assign to the so-called physical world, but I'll just kind of give two to keep it simple. First is universality of appearance. There's shared experience. So when I see a chair over there, I can say, Josh, look over there. What do you see? And when he says chair, I go, Destiny, look over there. What do you see? Chair. I can go, oh, okay, it's not just me. That lends some credence to the idea that this experience I'm having of seeing a chair is being caused by something other than me, right?
He's a little bit verbose. He reminds me a little bit of like the moral Patrick David. It's just like, get to the point.
So there's the universality of experience that I share this with other people. The second is the involuntary nature of it. When it comes to these physical perceptions I have, there's something about them that impose on me, that there's a kind of constraint I experience. So for instance, I can close my eyes and I can imagine a blue colored car. I can manipulate it and change the color to red. I can make it go 80 miles an hour in my mind. Then I can bring it to a complete stop. I can have music playing in that scene. I can drain that scene of color. I seem to be like a god in that realm where I can manipulate and control. But then, and so that would be a good candidate for saying, well, that's just my subjective experiences. But when it comes to other kinds of perceptions I have, it seems that even when I don't want them to be there, I can't make them go away. Even when I want them to be there, I can't muster them up. And even when I have no concept of them or expect them, I seem to interact with them or run into them. I don't have to have a concept of a wall or have ever seen a wall in my life. And all of a sudden, I will have the phenomenological experience of hitting a wall. I can have the phenomenological experience of touching water or touching fire, even though I didn't have these concepts in my mind. And so the involuntary nature of the experience is another element that lends credence to the idea that this is imposing on me from the outside. So I just take those two features, and if I need more, I'll give more. But if I just start with those, universality of appearance and the involuntary nature of the perceptions, the best explanation for that is that there really is something out there, a tree, a mountain, or what have you, that is imposing on me and causing me to have these subjective experiences. So there is a subjective component, but there's an objective component that's causing it. One quick point of clarification. To say that there is something out there that's causing me to experience this isn't to make a claim to knowledge about having a complete theory about what it is that's out there. Because there are entity realists who would say, it's a tree as I see it, causing me to see it as such. And there are structural realists who would say, these are just geometrical extensions in space. The pattern is something that I impose, but like it's atoms and molecules imposing on me. Either way, both of them are realism. Even if you take like a Berkeleyan idea of these are ideas in the mind of God, that's still a kind of realism, but it's a disagreement about the substance of what's real. He says it's not physical, it's ideas in the mind of God. Okay, so that's my soft case for physical realism. Let's pause here.
I don't know if you've argued with somebody, but you've made this point a few times. So I don't know if you've had a big disagreement, but I'm always going to agree with you there. I don't know if it was Searle or whatever. There's like the referent triangle or whatever.
Yeah.
But like when people 2,000 years ago said water, and then we say water today, there's a question of like, are we referring to the same thing? And it's like, well, how could you have even known what water was in the past when you didn't know anything about chemistry, right? When I say water, I mean H2O, but like, well, not really. This isn't pure H2O in front of me, or But so I understand when you're making those distinctions. I don't know if it sounds like you've had a big distinction in the past or argument with somebody in the past. Or that's why I laughed there. Sorry, yeah.
So this is my first one actually, but I think about these things and
okay.
I just feel like distinctions are a type of thing that don't get made.
Sure, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so that's my case for physical realism. I like to now show how that applies to moral realism. But before I do that, any questions? Any thoughts so far?
It's going to be interesting.
No, I think I broadly agree that your two prongs basically were universality. We can all speak to kind of like,
because everything you just said kind of goes without saying. Nothing that he said really blew my mind there. But how does he apply that same logic to the moral realm? That's going to be what I want to see.
A shared experience. We can all agree on some set of facts about external things. We can test them with our sense data. It'll convey similar things to us. And then there are things that are imposed upon you, whether or not you want to believe in them or not. You might have never been introduced to a chair or any physical object before somehow, and you'll walk into it and you will stub your toe and it will hurt and there will be a thing that you can't overcome. So I think I agree with these two things. Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now let's talk about moral realism, because I believe in that, like trees and mountains. I believe that with moral values. So the first observation we can make about...
Well, okay. I was actually just going to think there was an example I thought of that might test this, but you might want to explain more first. Or let me give you like a question, and then as you explain your moral realism, we can kind of speak to that, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned in your mind that there were certain things that that you could think of. Something that's kind of interesting to me is I feel like for humans, there are certain things that even in our mind where we're gods, there are certain kind of like epistemic principles that we can't think of. Yeah. So if I were to think of the two of you and I were to close my eyes and I want to imagine you as being taller and shorter than him at the same time. I actually can't conceive of that these are like, I don't know, I think it's principle of non-contradiction or whatever, that I can't actually even fathom that thing. Sure. So there seem to be some like logical things that I'm like locked into that I have to believe. So some things I can kind of bend and twist. I can imagine people as different sizes or shapes. There are certain logical or epistemic principles I can't imagine them violating. When it comes to morality, I would argue there are a lot of things that I can imagine breaking in ways that are totally fine. So for instance, I would say in every single movie ever, in the real world, I think killing a person is a really big deal. You're ending a life. There's a whole subset of experiences. I don't have to explain here why killing is really bad. If you watch, like John Wick or any of these movies that I enjoy, they're really fun. There's a lot of killing, and it really doesn't matter. It's like not a big deal at all. It's just like, a million people died. Who cares? Right. If you watch any of the Avengers movies, there's billions of dollars of citywide damage being caused, and nobody cares. Or whatever, no one cares. Sure. And that to me feels like a disconnect. Like I can never imagine the same type of violations of like the physical universe, but for the moral stuff, all of it could be thrown out so easily that I would argue it kind of tests that maybe that imposition
Good point.
subset of your, you've got like the universality and the imposition that your morality there isn't actually imposed at all. You could totally throw it out if you want to make some kind of fun, interesting thing.
Yeah.
And okay, so then you can explain what you're going to say, then maybe find a way.
Yeah, because the black gentleman is trying to build up the two arguments as if they're both as strong as the other. And he laid out a perfect sort of definition of the objective world, the physical objective world, and then he was like, okay, let me say the same, let me lay out the same principles for the moral world. And yeah, I don't really know how that's possible.
To come back and maybe answer that question, how would you? Yeah,
that's really good. Yeah, it's great to flag that. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of points of clarification about that, though.
Yeah, go for it.
When it comes to these thought experiments, the part that I believe is purely subjective, that I'm making up, is the part where I'm able to just create and destroy at whim, right? But I do experience constraints, and I take those constraints as evidence of a reality that imposes on me. And so I'm a realist when it comes to laws of logic, epistemic principles, in a way that I'm not when it comes to my ability to imagine a blue-colored giraffe, right? One of them I'm making up, and it's a constraint that I can blow right through at any time, and the other imposes on me, and there's more to deal with than just me. There's a reality that contends with me. The second thing, too, is I want to make sure we don't treat all constraints as merely in the form of that which is inconceivable. Because when it comes to physical structures, I can imagine myself walking through walls. And when I close my eyes and see myself doing that, that's the part that's subjective. The experience of TK walking through a wall in his mind, that's something that he created. That's not a reality imposing on me. That's me blowing through constraints in this realm where I have almost godlike powers. But in the physical world, no matter how much I can imagine, not so much in the physical world, but when there are certain phenomenological experiences where no matter how hard I try, they say, no, you can't go any further. Stop. Right. And I don't have any power over them, even if I don't like it. So constraints don't have to be inconceivable. It can be conceivable that I can surpass the constraint, but there is a real thing that I'm unable to do because of them. So just those points of clarification. All right. So now applying the soft case for realism to moral realism, we see those same two features, universality of appearance. In most discussions on morals, people focus on the disagreements. The disagreements are easy because the disagreements are inflated. The reason disagreements are inflated is because when it comes to physical reality, I'm limited in how many things I can create, right? But when it comes to moral reality, I can treat any claim as if it's a moral judgment. And so it's easy for me to print money in the realm of moral judgments. So I can say, what kind of water are you drinking? Is that Fiji water? Man, you're a bad person. And now I've just created a moral claim. And so there's an excess of moral claims. And I think one point we both could agree on is that there are many things that are treated like a moral issue that are probably not moral issues. I like strawberry ice cream. You like chocolate ice cream. Josh doesn't like ice cream at all. Who's right? None of us are bad guys for our taste. It's a matter of taste. And a moral realist can make a distinction between matters of taste, matters of fact. So not all claims about the moral value of things are actually legitimate claims. Some of them are morals, matters of taste. Okay, so, but if we focus on the agreements, we find something interesting. We find that there are certain moral convictions at a fundamental level that are shared in a way that is geographically across space and that is also enduring over time. So for instance, when we argue about particulars, we often don't pay attention to what we presuppose in the argument. So let's say someone says, I think the appropriate legal drinking age should be 25. And another person says, no, I like it where we have it in the US, it's 21. And another person says, I think you guys are just way too serious and motherly. It's 16, that's a good age. Well, what none of them are discussing is the fact that there is such a thing as an inappropriate age. That's where the agreement is. The disagreement is, well, how much wiggle room do we have within that? No one's making the argument that we should give babies whiskey, right? And so there's a shared intuition that there is such a thing as a wrong age to administer alcohol. So when we look at cultures, every culture has a concept of treachery or betrayal. Every culture has a concept of arbitrary killing. Every culture has a concept of there are certain conditions in which it is permissible to kill another person, and there are certain conditions where arbitrary killing is not justified. And so even where these cultures disagree on the particulars, we're not able to find counterexamples where we can point to cultures that have no moral.
But you could argue about the ones that are universal. It's just the universal was because it's pragmatic. That's pragmatic moralism. That's not moral realism. The devil's in the details. The devil's, yeah, the details is that's where he should be attacking, because the ones that you just used as evidence as a moral reality, the ones that, yeah, of course, every civilization in history all over the globe is going to have laws or morals according to those actions, is because it's pragmatic to have them happen or not happen. Like, you can't have everyone killing each other. Obviously, that's going to become immoral.
Categories at all. Every culture has its concept of heroes and villains. This is the type of person that's worth emulating. This is the type of person that embodies virtue. This is the type of person that does evil and that we should shun. Now, that's an observation. That doesn't mean morals exist just from that, but that's an observation that we have this universality of appearance in the same way that I don't just seem to see a tree. You also seem to see it too.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to believe in trees yet, but that is something that has to be explained, and we can't just ignore that.
Can I ask a quick?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so a quick question, because I agree with everything you've said so far, which makes sense because you've said it's not technically.
I've run out of battery on my camera, so I guess that'll have to do for tonight. I'll see you again tomorrow for another debate stream.